Bonjour, bon après-midi tout le monde. Alors, nous reprenons avec le panel présidé par Janet Walker, qui est présenté par CIArb. Merci beaucoup.
Welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. Can you hear me? Excellent, excellent. So we are truly blessed this afternoon. I am sure that anyone in the room today would come to a panel on any topic with these two speakers, the Right Honourable Beverley McLachlin and the Honourable Yves Fortier.
But you haven't.
Well, yeah. They will be here momentarily, I'm sure. Can I only say that on this particular topic, we are truly blessed, because if there are any two people who might have wisdom to impart to us on the topic of achieving consensus and good deliberations, it is these two fine speakers. Justice McLachlin, as you all know, served for nearly four decades as a judge, and latterly 17 years as the Chief Justice, the longest serving Chief Justice in Canada. But beyond that, someone who established an unsurpassed and unprecedented level of collegiality on that court. And we have all benefited from that. Reasoned decisions that we can all understand, with whatever dissents are clearly marked, but otherwise marked by very collegial decision making, leading to considerable consensus. But beyond that, also on other international tribunals. And Maître Fortier, to use a sports analogy, might be described as the GOAT, the greatest of all time arbitrators. And can I only say, Maître Fortier has served not only in so many tribunals, in so many contexts around the world, achieving consensus on the most difficult issues, but also in other deliberative bodies, not the least of which the United Nations Security Council, at particularly momentous time in history in 1989. So you can just begin to imagine the kind of discussions and deliberations that have gone on in those bodies. So we are very, very fortunate today to have them discuss with us the possibility and the way of achieving consensus. But before we do, we had a fascinating panel just before the break, in which the question of achieving consensus was put itself into question. So I just want to ask the two of you, before we begin to speak about achieving consensus, what is the importance of it? Why do we bother with it? Why does it matter?
Well, I'll go first. I think consensus is different than groupthink. And what we heard in the session before was, we want to get the best reasoned decisions. And there is a danger in multi-member tribunals having groupthink come in, which is where one person or one point of view dominates the entire group. Consensus, to my mind, I've always thought of it a little bit differently. It's trying to minimize unnecessary differences. And when I was on the court, we would sometimes go for 2 or 3 conferences trying to minimize differences that didn't have to be there. So often the differences arise because, well, for a variety of decisions. But if you keep talking about the case and you keep mulling it over and you're doing this in respect and collegiality, then you minimize the differences. If at the end of the day somebody says, I just cannot sign on to whatever, then you respect that, and there are ways of handling that which we'll talk a little bit about later. But to the extent you can achieve consensus, it is the best kind of decision making, and I think it gives the parties, whether it's in court or in arbitration, the confidence that there has been a lot of thought and people have all come to agree, and that strengthens the acceptability of the decision.
Maître Fortier.
Well, achieving consensus is an objective of achieving consensus on this panel is very important. Like, turn off your phone, Fortier. I've achieved consensus. My apologies. Yeah, achieving consensus is an objective which the chair has in mind. But I think it's important for the chair not to be obsessed with consensus, especially when he or she meets his colleagues for the first time. I strongly believe in the necessity of having the chair create an atmosphere where consensus will be the inevitable outcome of the discussions to come. And this is done in many ways. One way which I favor is ensuring that when you meet your two colleagues, your two co-arbitrators, that you don't think, oh, I'm going to try and convince this one about this particular point, or I'm going to try and convince this one about that other point. You're talking about various subjects. And I'm an adept of creating an atmosphere within the tribunal where you don't talk about the subject, where you talk about the weather, where you talk about the latest game between the Oilers and the Panthers, when you talk about that wonderful tennis match yesterday between Mr. Skinner and Mr. Alcatraz, or whatever his name is. You have to ensure that the consensus will come about not because it is being driven by the chair, but because you've created an atmosphere which will lead to a consensus.
I do recall you saying some years ago something about the opportunity to enjoy together some good food and fine wine.
Well, that is part of the prelude to sitting with the parties, getting your two arbitrators to enjoy a good meal with the chair, and again talking about the last tennis match, or talking about the last hockey game that they have seen. Make sure that your co-arbitrators are not only focused on the case. Make sure that they have other things to talk about, to think about. That to me is absolutely vital. And if good food and good wine goes with it, all the better.
And I would just add to that make sure that they are focused, first of all, not on the case, just on establishing the rapport and so on. But when you, if you could inculcate as chair the idea that we're all in this together, and we're not rowing against each other at this point. We're not pulling separately. We are here together to find the right solution, and that can really go a long way. Occasionally, you might find a wing that has a feeling they have to sort of push in every point for the party that appointed them. But you can overcome that by saying, we're all in this together. We're trying to get the right. You don't say it like that, but by these conversations, a good dinner, a few jokes, you know, over coffee in your private room. You don't want to see the party see you laughing too much, but you know what I mean. The lightheartedness that goes with just being human beings in a common quest. That's what I would think you're after. I
agree with the lady on the wool sack entirely. I cannot stress enough the importance for the chair of ensuring that there are other issues in mind over, above, beyond the case that that you're trying to resolve. The case is part of your, of course, it's the essential of your mandate, but there are other matters happening out there, and again, whether it's on a tennis court, on a nice hockey ring, it is happening, and you must ensure that your colleagues are not too, how would I put it, too crystallized with one issue, the issue that they have been retained to decide.
And once you've established the rapport, some of us might begin to think that given your worldly wisdom of many, many years, that it's just a question of savoir-faire, of having learned some sort of art. Can you explain some of the techniques that you've developed over the years to help to bring about the consensus? Perhaps you, Justice McLachlin, might begin on this.
Well, thank you very much. I think one of the, I learned a lot as Chief Justice, and people would say maybe not enough, but
You've just read my thoughts.
I did think consensus was important, and I thought about how to bring it about. And so some of my humble observations are that as chair, and you heard this from the previous speaker, you should never speak first. In the Supreme Court of Canada, when I was there, and I think for a couple of Chief Justices before that, there was a tradition that you started with the junior member. And the chief didn't wade in and say, well, this is a simple case, I think we can do it this way or that way. The chief just was quiet and listened to everybody. And then I think it was Laskin, Chief Justice Laskin, who had brought in the idea that they would do it with the junior member, or maybe it was after that with Dixon, I'm not quite sure on that. But anyway, when I arrived at the court, that was the tradition. So there you are, your first day, and you know, you've tried to read the case and so on, and the Chief Justice looks at you around the table and says, well, what do you think? And there's 8 others there who are senior to you and know all the ropes, and it's pretty intimidating. But what that does, what that system did, was force that person who might otherwise have been intimidated, might otherwise have succumbed to groupthink or respect for another person, it forced that person to say what they think. So if you're the chair and you think you need to know the psychology of who's on the panel. Some people might be very aggressive and willing to advance their view and be very aggressive in doing so. Other people might be a little bit more deferential. So start with the person who might not be the obvious person with his hands up saying this is what we need to do, and let them talk and make them talk if you can. Now that's not always possible. I have one experience where the third person wouldn't talk, and he would just say, well, whatever you want to do, that's fine with me. Now that's not ideal, but what do you do as a chair? It troubled me greatly, I'm sure he was doing his work, but he was, or maybe he was just so convinced by the other 2 people's reasoning that he never, but I tried to get him to speak first and he wouldn't. But you do your best to do that. So chair shouldn't go first, and I think you bring out the views of the other people. And it's very important, I think, to just set the tone that you're keeping an open mind and you're listening. Listening is a huge part of group decision making. And sometimes people don't listen very well in any group decision making situation. They have done a brilliant analysis, you know, and the human brain is kind of structured, and we as lawyers are taught, got a problem here, we got to solve it. And we sit down and we read and we analyze and we work it all out, and we're pretty impressed with how brilliant we are. And we get there and we say, here, this is the answer. That's kind of deadly to getting maximum consensus, because people tend to get their mind made up. And of course, psychologically, that's very satisfying. I figured this out, I've got my mind made up, my job is done. Much harder to sit back and listen to the contrary view, listen to the other views. And the chair has this duty to try to encourage people to keep an open mind until they've heard. And I'll tell you one more story, and then but this is was so important in my life. When I went on the court in 1989, Bertha Wilson, first woman to be on the Supreme Court of Canada, was giving me advice, which I greatly appreciated. And at one point she said something I've never forgotten. She said, the people of Canada are not just entitled to the views of 9 judges on the Supreme Court. They are entitled to the views of each of those 9 judges after each of those 9 judges has listened to and respectfully considered the views of the other 8. And I kept that with me. I thought she said it so well. And if at the end of the day, having had that respectful, mutual consideration, and Bertha wrote her share of dissents, but you still are satisfied, fine. But that's your job. Your job is to listen respectfully, not just to do your own analysis, and try to arrive at a consensual decision-making process.
Yves,
Well,
Mr. Fortier.
Having listened to Beverley, if I may, Beverley, my inclination would be to say that first and foremost, if you are going to be serving as the chair or the chief justice of a tribunal, you have to be very patient.
Yeah.
You have to be very, very patient. And you're not there to dictate to any one of your colleagues what the answer to the issues that they're dealing with, that the tribunal is dealing with, as to what the answer should be, but rather how do you get there? How do you get to the point of the discussion where there is a consensus that emerges? And this will only be possible if you have, I'm saying, putting the word in brackets here, if you have educated your colleagues in such a way that they will respect what you have to say. This is absolutely crucial, not to be seen as dictating to your colleagues what the decision is going to be, but rather to put into de mettre en place effectivement la patience qui va amener vos collègues à dire oui, il a raison. Oui, il a raison parce que il m'a convaincu que sur d'autres sujets, il était très bien éduqué. Il avait bien compris quel était le problème qui était soumis au tribunal. And I used the word before, and I'm using it again. The chair has to be very, very patient in ensuring that his or her 2 colleagues are going to be reaching the consensus that he or she is looking for. Because remember, consensus is something to vie for, it's something to hope for, but it's not necessarily the consensus that you had envisaged when you were first appointed to the tribunal. It can be something else. It can be something which one of your colleagues has mentioned when you were having a good meal and a good cup of coffee or a good cup of wine. You have to be extremely patient, and with patience will come. I'm convinced. I've lived it many times. Will come the right answer.
And you both have extraordinary depth and breadth of experience, not merely in arbitration, but in other settings, as we spoke about at the outset. those situations can be somewhat different from arbitration. Why and how is consensus different in arbitration? Is it more important, less important, and why?
Well, yes, I did, as you mentioned, serve on the Security Council of the United Nations for a couple of years, and one of the many lessons that was that I learned when I was on the Security Council is that everyone's voice, there are 15 members of the council, that everyone's voice is important, whether you're the ambassador from Liechtenstein, or whether you're the ambassador from Switzerland, or whether you're the ambassador from France or from the United Kingdom. You have to respect the views that are expressed by every one of your colleagues and give him or her the chance to speak. Because you never know when he or she will say something, oh, I hadn't thought of that. That's something which I'm definitely going to have to deal with as the case proceeds, as the issue is being discussed. So yes, be patient and be focused at the same time, focused on, because you must never lose sight of the fact that you are sitting in that chair with one thought in mind, achieving consensus. And you must be comfortable with the consensus that emanates from the discussions, whether or not it's a consensus that you feel that you're responsible for, or whether it's been proposed by somebody else.
I think that's very important, and from the perspective on the Supreme Court of Canada and my experience there, deciding whether to dissent was kind of an art form in itself. Obviously, one would not dissent unless one had a view of on the principle or the law that was different than others. But it's not a black and white thing necessarily, and I think it's even less black and white in arbitration, because sometimes people, for example, might be tempted to dissent simply because one phrases a principle in a slightly different way or analyzes the issue in a slightly different way. And that may not be a good thing, even in judicial decision making. One of my colleagues would say to me, he said, I'll put a little water in my wine. And I always remembered that. But if it was something that he really felt was important in terms of providing future guidance, and that's another thing, element that may not apply so much in arbitration, he would say, I'm going to write a short dissent. But up to if it was a side point, if it was a way something had been expressed, if it was, I would go 1, 4, 5 instead of 1, 2, 3 in my analysis. He'd say, I'd put some water in my wine. And I'll go with however the person who first authored the decision wanted to say it, because essentially I think it's right. And who am I to say that my little formulation is going to be better? Certainly not worth dissenting over. So I think when you're on a tribunal, you need to think about that. And I think most tribunal members do. And we're not there, as in a court, to provide definitive legal statements on the law for future court decisions. Your audience is the parties, essentially, although that may be changing a little in some formats, and so you only dissent if you really feel that it's something you couldn't sign on to, and then we minimize how we do it. Often we say, the majority says 1, 2, 3, 4, and arrives at this conclusion. One of the members would have said something else, and then the reasons very briefly summarized, and then everybody knows. It's not a bad message sent to the parties that both sides were considered, and one of them was persuaded, but they didn't win in the end. And often that can even be done these little things can be done in footnotes to minimize, and that can be a technique that's used. So I would think we need to really be conscious of not dissenting when it's not necessary, and in arbitration this is particularly important.
Yeah, you can dissent on major issues, and you can also dissent on minor issues. And as chair, you have to determine whether the issue in respect of which one of your colleagues is indicating that he or she would like to file a dissent is major or minor. And this is not as easily done as it may appear to be once the decision is set out. You have to look at the issue and determine how you can make a major point become minor. And this takes a lot of expertise on the part of the Chief Justice or on the part of the chair, in order that when it is conveyed to the parties, it is seen as being a minor issue, not a major one. And this is where again I stress the importance of having created an atmosphere within the tribunal where each party, whether it's the chair vis-à-vis the wing person or the wing person vis-à-vis the chair, where there is respect. Respect is extremely vital. And again, I may be repeating myself, but it happens with age. You know, I think it's extremely important to have created an atmosphere initially when you meet your two colleagues. I'm talking in terms of a tribunal chair at the moment. When you meet your two colleagues in order to talk about ice hockey, in order to talk about tennis, in order to talk about anything but the case which you have to determine, the case that you have to deal with, and that is an obligation, if you wish, which, in my view, rests with the chair.
So we are incredibly fortunate today because we have just a few moments, and so we will take a few questions from the audience. This is a big opportunity. Oh, gosh. Everyone, yes, please. The microphone? Ah, we have a question over here.
Thank you. So thank you, firstly, very much to both of you for coming and for speaking to us today. It really has been a privilege to hear from you both. My question is for Madam Chief Justice. Specifically, I'm wondering, in the change from your time at the Supreme Court to your time as an arbitrator, what do you find has been the biggest weakness with your fellow arbitrators or other members of the tribunal, which, if given the chance, you would love to correct?
Oh. You know, I think I've been very fortunate. I have heard stories from war stories from other chairs and arbitrators about colleagues who are têtus dès le début, ils ont leur réponse. I've heard stories about people, and I've experienced, as I said, one person who really didn't contribute verbally, but felt he was there to make the decision in an honorable way, but just didn't want to talk. So there are problems, I suppose, out there. But I have to say that my experiences have almost all been very happy and rewarding ones. And I have never done an arbitration where I ended feeling less than absolutely content with my colleagues. But I know that isn't always the case, so perhaps Yves would be a better person to answer this one.
It's very crucial in my estimation to be able to see in if you're arguing a case before Beverley McLachlin, to remember that she used to be the Chief Justice of Canada. And today she is sitting as a simple but very learned chair of a tribunal, and there is a movement. I think it's easier to go from being Chief Justice to being an arbitrator, and from being an arbitrator to being a Chief Justice. Much easier. And you know what? It works.
Yes, Paul.
Madam Chief Justice and Monsieur Fortier, both of you are highly respected in your respective careers.
Next question.
And I'm sure most of the time you've sat as chair. But have you had the experience, and how have you reacted to that, where you haven't been the chair of a tribunal, especially one that was going in a direction that maybe you weren't quite so happy with?
Well, I've had that experience. I was happy with the result, and in the end, but on one major point, I felt I couldn't agree with my colleagues. So I just wrote a little thing respectfully that was inserted in the reasons, and I understood where they're coming from, and I had my view. So it was all very amicable. There was no hard feeling, and we ended very, very happily, and I think the case was rightly decided. So I think you just treat it as a matter of respect. You respect your colleague's decision, but you have a different view, and you feel if it's important enough and you can't put your water in your wine, that you should say something about it, and you say something about it, but you never let it become personal. So that's my experience, and I really appreciate a chair, the chairs who work along the lines of what Yves has been describing, working with the two other people, bringing them together, and having a good time. That goes a long way, so I think whichever role you're in, that respect and that mutual appreciation will carry you through.
Let me address your question in this way. A few years ago, I sat as a wing person on a tribunal, and the chair did not act in the way I thought she should be acting. I was patient. I was very patient. The case lasted for about more than 20 days. And when we had finished the hearing, the chair looked at me and said, Yves, I don't think you agree with the positions that in our deliberations so far I have articulated. Why don't you write the decision? And broke into a big smile and I said, with pleasure. I had reached my goal, and eventually she agreed with the decision that I wrote.
Good solution. I like it.
That's a great story.
I think we have time for one more question. We have one at the back.
Madam Chief Justice, now that you have sat as an arbitrator, is there anything in hindsight that you think you have learned from your role as an arbitrator that may have informed you as a judge in either your past capacities that you think, you wish you had known this from arbitration that might have changed how you, whether it was in your early days or the Chief Justice days?
On the actual procedure of consensus building and so on, not necessarily, except to take Yves' point, there's more room for convivial dining out and that kind of thing, perhaps in arbitration, than we often have in the courts. I tried very hard as Chief Justice to maintain a collegial atmosphere, and we even had a cookout at one point at my house, and everybody had to participate. We did different things, but it's that collegial atmosphere that is so important. And I've seen arbitrators do this really, really well, and I think I tried to do it, and we did it. But arbitrators chairs are often very, very good at that. This is slightly off the decision-making process, but the thing I have learned from arbitration is that there's more flexibility and willingness to look at how procedurally you handle a particular case, and do so in an expeditious way. I have sat on the odd arbitration that went too long, but most are pretty expeditious. And I've learned that very complicated, difficult, hard-fought disputes can be resolved in a reasonable time, at a reasonable expense, to the satisfaction and acceptance of both parties. That is the goal, I think, as an arbitrator, I would like to seek. And sometimes the court system can be very rigid. And I really appreciate working with the flexibility in the arbitral system.
I think Beverly has just expressed in her own inimitable way how important it is for the chair to be patient, to be very, very patient. Don't rush into your decision. Give a chance to your two colleagues to express themselves. And eventually, it's not always the case, but eventually, it is not always the case, but it's very often the case that you will come to, the tribunal will come to the right decision if all three arbitrators, especially the chair, is going to be patient. Prenez votre temps, prenez votre temps. La réponse va éventuellement être sur la table parce qu'on va y arriver ensemble. On va y arriver ensemble. Très important.
Well, I think it remains only for us to thank you all both so much for these words of wisdom. Thank you.